Good afternoon again. I'm sorry to try your patience for, I think this is the fourth time during this conference. Gideon Rose, who was supposed to be moderating this panel, was stuck in New York due to the weather, so I'll do my best to stand in for him this afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome again to the podium Senator Jeanne Shaheen and Senator Mike Rounds as well. Thank you very much, Senator Rounds.
I'm a fill-in too.
You're a fill-in too?
Yeah.
Okay, well, only the best people get that role, I think. Senator Rounds is a Republican senator from South Dakota, and Senator Shaheen, of course, Democratic senator from New Hampshire. One of the issues we're going to discuss in this panel is the Senate NATO Observer Group. Now, just before we go any further, certainly for non-Americans, we hear about congressional committees and also caucuses. What actually is the Observer Group? What does it mean?
This is a group that was revised from the 90s when NATO was going through enlargement. There was a group set up in the Senate by then leader Trent Lott on the Republican side and Tom Daschle on the Democratic side. And they thought it would be helpful to appoint a number of senators to help shepherd through any accession agreements from those countries that were being added to NATO. And so it served a very positive purpose for a number of years, and then when enlargement stopped for a while, the group disbanded. But given questions about support for NATO and where the Congress was, Senator Tillis and I, who Senator Rounds is filling in for, thought that it would be a good idea to restart the Senate NATO Observer Group. The acronym is not so fortunate. It's called SNOG. But I heard a really good thing today, and that was, as we were debating whether this was a good acronym, somebody pointed out that the Irish used the word snog to describe a back room in a pub where the real business is done. So I thought, given that description, that's not a bad acronym then.
There you go.
Well, the British just use it to describe having a kiss with somebody. So.
Oh, well, that may be a little iffier.
Okay. So it sounds actually that, I mean, it isn't a formal committee, it isn't a caucus, it's kind of a, if you like, a coalition of the willing, that groups of senators, individual senators want to come together, but when it comes down to actually doing business, what does this mean?
Well, let me point out that there are 5 members from both sides of the aisle, so 10 in all who are appointed by the leadership to the group, and there are also ex officio members from the Foreign Relations Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committees, and the leadership. So it is a good, it's 1/10 of the United States Senate. And we are just beginning to think about what all we might be able to do. Senator Tillis and I this summer went to the NATO meeting in Brussels, and we had a very good panel there at a time when there were a lot of questions about what was going to happen at that NATO meeting, where we talked and very strongly with the audience about our commitment to NATO, that it's something that reflects not just where the Senate and Congress is, but we think it's also important to point out that the American people support NATO, and to send that message to Europe about the importance of the transatlantic relationship and about NATO. So we've also met with representatives from NATO, with the Secretary General, with our ambassador, Ambassador Hutchinson, with the Canadian ambassador to NATO, the British ambassador to NATO. So it's an opportunity for us to educate ourselves about what's going on.
Senator Shaheen referred to the initial idea of this group was about expansion of NATO, but then expansion more or less comes to an end. It hasn't quite come to an end, and NATO has an open door policy. But you also mentioned, Senator, this idea that you wanted to make a statement. And this was presumably, Senator Rounds, in response to some of the rhetoric during the campaign when President-elect Trump was talking about NATO being obsolete. It doesn't seem as though he thinks that now, but certainly at the time there must have been concern. And was this the kind of concern you wanted to address?
Well, it really occurred after that, and it occurred during a time period in which, as folks from other NATO countries were wondering whether or not the United States had a true commitment to NATO, we wanted to assure them that the commitment to NATO is bipartisan, and it is in both the House and in the Senate, and that that has not changed. and that while we'll have discussions about, and each president has their own way of expressing where they want to go and how they want to do it. As a businessman, the president has expressed in a negotiating terms what he wants to see changed. He wants to make it stronger. But sometimes that doesn't come across that way if the folks in the other countries are perhaps not coming in as business people, but as diplomats, and they're wondering, well, why, what happened here? And so for us, we're sending the message on a bipartisan basis. I can't emphasize that enough. This is a bipartisan group of United States senators who are saying, we're committed to NATO, and we're going to make it stronger as best we can. We're going to honor all of our commitments, and we're here to share that with the other members across the Atlantic. And so from our perspective, this is, and once again, bipartisan in nature, which nothing happens in the United States Senate unless it's bipartisan. It just simply doesn't, not with regard to treaties or with regard to public policy.
Let me probe that a little bit further, because I mean, in the United States itself, but certainly outside the United States, we hear of very little else other than the very sharp divisions in American politics. The divisions across the country are divisions in red state, blue state, but the fierce and very tense battleground amongst Democrats and Republicans. But on this issue, I mean, there is the NATO observer group, 10 members of the Senate, that's 10% of the Senate. But how much more widespread does it go? I mean, it's one thing to be bipartisan amongst 10 members of the Senate. What about the other 90 members of the Senate?
You want to start, or shall I?
Well, we unanimously passed a resolution supporting NATO before the NATO summit in Brussels. So we also passed legislation, I think 20-1 out of the Foreign Relations Committee in support of NATO before that summit. So, it's not just those 10 members. It extends much broadly beyond that.
It is, and in fact, within the United States Senate, I mean, our rules are hundreds of years old. And part of it is we can do anything we want if we've got the votes, or if nobody objects. And with the Senate, a unanimous consent move means we change the rules on the spot. So if we want to spend on a highway bill $5 billion to extend it while we're continuing to negotiate, one person can stand on the floor of the Senate and I make a motion to spend $5 billion to continue the transportation bill for another 30 days. I was a freshman. Everybody else was leaving town. They asked me if I'd stick around and do it. Nobody objected, so we spent $5 billion. And so and this is a unique way in which the Senate operates. On unanimous consent, we can do lots, but it takes unanimous consent. So, and if it's not, then I know there's a discussion out there about there's rancor among Republicans and Democrats. There really hasn't been a time in which there wasn't rancor between Republicans and Democrats, but that's in many cases healthy because it hones the debate. But I can also tell you, and I've only been there, this is going on my 4th year, but I can tell you that we make friends, we work together on lots of issues, and we do lots of things on either a unanimous basis or on a consensus basis. But in most cases, that's not real exciting, and it doesn't catch the news media's attention. What catches their attention is rancor and division and disagreement, particularly if it involves the Senate and the House and the President.
I was going to come to the President precisely at that point, because when the President sees a Senate and also a House, but certainly we'll stay with the Senate since you're both senators right now, that is able to pull together a lot of bipartisan support about a particular issue, in this case NATO, do you feel it does and in fact has had an impact on President Trump in his approach to NATO and his somewhat more positive spin on NATO than at certain points during his campaign?
I'll let my Republican colleague answer that one.
Well, look, I think this president approaches things differently. Look, he came in as a... I hope I'd get some agreement on that. But it's not necessarily bad that he tries something different. Look, he doesn't come in as a politician. He comes in as a businessman. He's going to come in and negotiate from day one. And if he's buying something, he's going to come in lowball. If he's going to sell something, he's going to come in highball. I mean, that's the way he starts it out. But, the American public kind of like it because he's not playing games. He's in negotiating. And they appreciate that. They also like the fact, he's not going through the press on a lot of stuff. He's tweeting things out. And I share with people, this president has a coffee clutch with the American public on a daily basis. He's sitting down at a coffee thing and he's just sharing with them exactly what his thoughts are, unfiltered. Imagine that. But you know what? There's about a third to a half of the American public that really appreciate that. And so what we look at, me personally, not necessarily the Senate or the House, but I look at it and I say, okay, I'm getting an inkling about what he's saying, and he's saying what he's feeling. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what he's going to do. It means that's what he's saying, and he's getting a sense of what's going on. You take a look at his comments, and then you take a look at his actions, and sometimes they are a little bit different. And if you take a look at, the Russian situation, he says he wants to be friends with President Putin. You know what? That's okay, as long as he's ready to be tough with President Putin as well. We're spending more money on defense than we have in years. He's come in strong with economic sanctions. How many other presidents have done as much to put Mr. Putin on the spot as this president has? So, it hones, but it also makes Republicans and Democrats talk a lot in the House and the Senate about, okay, the executive branch is going this direction. What's our thoughts on this? And do we agree or do we disagree? And do we need to send a message? Sometimes we nearly unanimously send a message of either agreement or disagreement, but we're trying to do it in a respectful tone.
And I would argue, for example, on sanctions against Russia, there was a lot of reluctance from the White House to do that. When the Senate passed the sanctions bill almost unanimously, and Congress passed it with fewer than 5 dissenting votes, then the White House fell in line. So I would agree that when the message is very clear and bipartisan, that it does seem to have an impact on the president.
I'm not asking you to give everyone a lesson in American civics, but the Senator Rounds, you referred to the fact that and you did yourself, Senator Shaheen, when the Senate is united, it is an extremely powerful institution. And I'm not sure that many people outside the United States instinctively understand just how much power there is in the United States Senate. And do you have that sense that when you are, particularly on this issue where you can get bipartisan support, that when you are actually working on Russia, working on sanctions against Russia over Ukraine, for example, that you really can make a difference?
Absolutely. The other thing that we have to remember is that Congress controls the power of the purse. And if we decide in a bipartisan way, and I agree with Mike that things don't really happen unless they're bipartisan. There are a lot of things that don't happen, but things don't positively happen unless they're bipartisan generally. And if we decide that we're not going to fund something or we are going to fund something, the increase in defense spending, for example, there was strong bipartisan support to do that. And we also attached legislation, a bill to fund health and human services, social programs as part of that. And there was some objection from the White House. Congress passed both of those, overwhelmingly bipartisan, and the president signed them, despite concerns. So we do have the ability to have influence, and when we work together, it's powerful.
Let's focus this particular issue of the transatlantic relationship on Ukraine. We had in an earlier panel, which I actually moderated with Pavlo Klimkin, the Ukrainian foreign minister, and also Senator Coons. And one of the very interesting analogies that Senator Coons brought out was with the Baltic states, that after the annexation of the Baltic states, the United States Congress never recognized that annexation. And although it took several decades, in the end, those countries got their full independence back. Now, as I said to Senator Coons, well, hold on, does this mean we're talking about decades in terms of the struggle with Russia over Crimea and eastern Ukraine? And he pretty much said, yes, that this is something we have to at least be prepared to do. Are you in it for the long game when it comes to Russia and when it comes to Ukraine? Presumably you don't expect you're going to pass a resolution in Congress and next year Russia just abides by all the rules again. So, how much staying power is there in terms of pushing Russia back in Ukraine?
Well, I think there's a lot. And again, this is a place where there's strong bipartisan support. And I would argue that there were some suggestion that President Trump might be willing to say to Vladimir Putin, you go ahead, take Crimea, we won't object to that. And there were very loud rumblings from Congress that there would be strong objections to that. And we haven't heard that recently.
Yeah, look, let me just share. I think, and we can only speak for ourselves, but I think there's a sense that what happened to Ukraine and the challenge to their sovereignty is something that can't be allowed to happen. The question is, what is the appropriate path forward that will be successful? And it's going to take a number of things. Number one, the Ukraine itself as a country has to have the strong support of its own citizens. And that means also sharing with them and convincing them that it is the right thing to do to be independent and autonomous, and that it's better for them long term. And the second part is the European countries have got to support them in that effort, not only assistance probably economically and financially, but in bringing them into the Western outlook on what we expect from governments, and the fairness to both majority and minority parties, and the sense that the traditional size of the way that perhaps government has occurred under Russian direction is out of date, and that it's not the right way to move forward. But it means that there has to be a confidence on the part of the people there that the government of Ukraine is prepared to make those changes. On our part, we have to be in a position to support them in that and to help them in that. And I think you're going to find that in terms of the world stage, the United States is prepared to do that, because we see the big picture that this presents. Because if you're Mr. Putin and you deal from a position of strength, and if you're allowed to simply encroach on other countries continuously, one after the other, then at some point, who's next? And at some stage of the game, what happens to the rest of our allies in Europe and elsewhere? So for us, this is a case of where, as a leader in the West, as a leader among nations, we can't do it alone. We absolutely have to have partnerships. And so even for us, our emphasis is that we want these partnerships to continue. We value them, and we're prepared to do what we need to do to send that message. It's
Senator
critical.
Shaheen, President Trump has a point, as indeed his predecessor did, and that predecessor's predecessor, that when it comes to European nations, I mean, there are only 5 members of NATO that actually put up the recommended 2% of their GDP in their defense budgets. And I know as a Democratic senator, it might be a little bit sometimes difficult to give President Trump credit, but he has gone in there and really kicked them into line to some extent. Do you not think that actually President Obama and the Cardiff summit did actually get people to sign, most countries to sign on the dotted line, that they would raise defense spending to 2%? But do you think President Trump deserves some credit for actually really kicking them into line a little bit and making them realize, hey, you've actually got to do this, otherwise you're the ones making NATO obsolete, not the United States?
Well, I certainly think President Trump's emphasis on this has had an impact on continuing to urge the countries of NATO to follow through on their commitments, and that's been important. And I think it's also important that we recognize the other contributions that our NATO partners have made, not just getting to 2% of defense spending, but the other ways in which they contribute. So I think that's a good thing, and we need to continue to build on that and address the whole range of other issues that we've talked about here, the investment in cyber, the effort to have, the 4 30s, the 30 combat squadrons, the 30 ships, the 30 air squadrons, and ready to go in 30 days, so that we continue moving on those other efforts that NATO has underway.
Senator Rounds, I wanted to ask you specifically, before I turn to the audience, about the Republican Party's view on this matter of Europe. And I mean, there's been a lot of cynicism across the divide in American politics about, and not at all difficult to understand why there's been cynicism, because so few European countries actually meet that 2% obligation. Italy, for example, just submitted a budget in which it's going to actually cut defence expenditure next year. How much confidence, and I wonder specifically your sense in the Republican Party, is that the Europeans are really actually ever going to pull their weight? Or is it a sense that, yes, okay, President Trump's having a go, but it's a bit of a lost cause over there?
Look, time will tell how serious all of our allies are, our NATO members are, about making that commitment. Now, but we're also here to say that we recognize not only is it a matter of everybody's got to do their fair share in this process, but it's also a matter of us recognizing everything else that those countries provide as well. The other part of this is look, the reality is this is a 360 look now all the way around, and there are adversaries throughout the region. A primary adversary right now, and one that we're refocusing on, is big power competition, which is Russia and China. And you've got those folks at your doorstep. And Mr. Putin has clearly shown an interest in moving forward and taking back land. And you can see that as well as we can. And so I would suspect that that has done as much to try to convince our NATO allies that now is the time to send that message to Mr. Putin that we're all serious about it. So I'm going to give our NATO allies the benefit of the doubt that they're going to do the best they can to do so, and that, this NATO alliance is strong. And I think just what was committed to here in the last 6 months with regard to cyber, and the fact that you've now identified that as an additional domain in which if Russia or another country attacks one of our members in that domain, it is the same as attacking under Article 5 all of the rest of the countries, which is a huge move. That doesn't happen with a weak organization. That's an organization that is making a commitment. So we have to recognize that as well. And I'm prepared to give the other countries in this alliance the benefit of that doubt, but naturally, we want to see it happen as well. So help us. We put $168 billion more in our defense, $168 billion more in our defense budget this year and next year. We're serious about it. The question earlier was, are we tired of winning? And the answer is no. But we also know that we can't do it alone, and that these partnerships are critical to us as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take some questions. Kurt, please.
Thank you very much, Kurt Volker from the McCain Institute and a former ambassador to NATO. And I just wanted to ask your thoughts looking forward on something. It didn't come up in the conversation yet. When NATO was founded, it was because the Soviet Union had taken over governments in Central and Eastern Europe and was threatening to undermine governments in Western Europe. So it was a very robust step forward into creating security through defense and deterrence. Similarly, when Germany was then invited to join NATO, it was a divided country, partially occupied by Soviet forces, and we were stepping right up to the line to say, we are going to defend this. Right now, the only places in Europe where we face that kind of threat and conflict are Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. These are the places where security is on the line today. And I wonder what your thoughts are about future membership for those countries.
Okay, senators, please.
Well, I would argue there are some other places in Europe where defense is on the line as well. I think the Western Balkans is a place where Russia continues to meddle. And we saw in Montenegro that they attempted a coup there in an effort to keep Montenegro from joining NATO. We've heard from other members of countries in the Western Balkans that Russia is meddling in their affairs. We're seeing that in Bosnia with the Republic of Srpska, where they are being encouraged to secede from Bosnia-Herzegovina. So I I think it's a bigger problem than that. So.
Senator Rounds, how about Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova as one-day members of NATO?
Look, I think it's a decision that the NATO organization itself makes. I would never preclude that, but it takes all the members. Remember, this is an alliance of nations that makes that decision together, and I think sometimes we have to respect that. And so, when the time is right, yeah, this is an open invitation to other countries, but it's one that still requires NATO, the NATO alliance, to make that offer and approval. But I'm going to say one more thing, and I think Jeanne hit this on the head. Look, Mr. Putin is going to continue to test things as long as we allow him to do so. And he's not stupid. He understands that there has to be a reward for the risks that he takes. But he's also going to use every resource available, and that includes the domain of cyber. And what you will see is a very quiet program where they will come in and they will test. And they'll start out by providing misinformation within your nations. They'll come in and they'll take bits and pieces and they'll release it. They did that in our election in 2016. We caught them. We know exactly what they did. They have tried to manipulate elections and the public policy discussions in your countries as well. And until there is a price to be paid, they will continue to do so. As an alliance, we have to not only work hard at making it more expensive defensively, we have to make it more expensive for them to try to get into our systems. And second of all, on an offensive basis, we have to be able to have a fair cost to them to where they start to think that maybe they have to rethink the strategy of going in and manipulating using the fifth domain of cyber.
I want to get back to your question, though, about Ukraine and Georgia, because one of the things that we've talked about here is that NATO is not just a military alliance, it's an alliance of shared values, a belief in the rule of law, a belief in human rights, a belief that government should be positive, that we need to address corruption within government. And there are a number of reforms that need to happen in not just Georgia and Ukraine, but other countries that have aspirations to join NATO, that they need to continue towards those reforms in order for the NATO countries to be able to say, yes, we're ready to have you join. So I think that's very important, and I think it's also important for NATO to help those countries that are interested to move forward with those reforms.
It's a good incentive. Yeah.
Peter MacKay.
Thank you, Robin. Senators Tillis and Shaheen, thank you so much for being here and for taking part in this important.
Rounds. He just looks like Tillis.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
No problem.
No.
Well, he was not, but unfortunately he couldn't make it, so I'm a fill-in.
I was working off the program.
No problem.
Just to follow up on Ambassador Volker's very relevant question, and certainly with the benefit of hindsight now, we look back on what could have been in terms of Ukraine in particular, Georgia as well, the entire annexation of Crimea, what would have happened. But to follow on the point of shared values, and I will invoke the sacred name of John McCain again, I remember vividly the comment, it might even have been made here, and that was that Russia was a mafia-run gas station masquerading as a country. And as an energy superpower, Canada and the United States have the ability, beyond sanctions, to provide clean, ethical energy from the North American continent to European countries like France, Germany, like Ukraine, that could cripple the Russian economy more than any tariffs that we could ever dream up or invoke. And so when we talk about security, energy security, economic security, commercial security, these are all intertwined. And I'm just interested in your thoughts. Given the growing energy independence of the United States of America, our increased ability through LNG tankers to provide that type of critical engine for the economies of other NATO countries, shared allies, Western countries for whom we share values, this to me seems to be something we could deploy more readily. And the weaponizing of energy that Russia has exhibited over many of its neighboring countries, former Soviet satellite countries, the Balkans and others, this to me seems to be an opportunity that we have not yet seized upon in hopes of bringing about a more secure world.
Well, excuse me, as you know, energy issues have been controversial in the United States and in the Senate and Congress. We have now opened the door for LNG to be exported to Europe and to other parts of the world. And I think, as you point out, there is a surplus of energy in the United States and an opportunity in the future to build out the infrastructure to allow that to happen.
Yeah, let me be candid. Look, we'd love to sell and to market those products to Europe. We also understand that every single country should be looking at diversifying their energy needs, and that they're all going to take a look at it based upon what's best for their country. We have to respect that, and we have to make the offer, and we've got to find ways to work through. But another sensitive area, and I'm just going to say this, is Russia, we always tell people, look, when the time comes in the middle of winter, when the impact can be the most, that's when the threats will be made from Russia as to whether or not they'll continue to have the natural gas flowing. But the response back from our allies may very well be, yes, but we most certainly wouldn't appreciate sanctions from the United States when we don't need them either. And so we've got to play our part well as well. And we have to make sure that we are a good partner as well. So this is a two-way street. And we have to respect you and your sovereignty. And we have to respect your need to do what you believe is best long-term for your country. We just hope that as we move forward that we are identified as being more trustworthy than Mr. Putin's Russia.
Okay, over here.
And we think we are.
Thank you very much. The claim seems to be that NATO allies are for democratic and human rights, but NATO alliance is divided. As I mentioned yesterday, there's 16+1 alliance with China, and the 16 countries in Europe, they don't speak for democratic values and human rights of China. Now there's new narrative is being developed, and many are buying it, that is China is the leader of clean energy, of climate change, of technology, including globalization. And this is being backed by latest Pew Research Center survey, where 30 years ago, China had less than 20% favorable view. Now it's 49% favorable and 42% unfavorable. Now, again, in that same survey, it shows that 70% of the people in 25 countries believe that China is doing more in the world affairs than America, Russia, America or Germany. Even in Canada, 42% think that Xi Jinping is playing a bigger role in global affairs than any democratic countries. So how do you counter that narrative, and how do you first unite the NATO alliance and make them speak for democratic values and human rights?
I know that on the earlier panel this was discussed a little bit, and one of the things that was talked about was the economic power that China has that now rivals the United States. And so we don't have the same situation that we had 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. We need to do better about providing the investments that will make a difference in some of those countries where we have historically had a presence, and now China is a competitor in that. We also need to look at the rhetoric again. I think one of the one of the challenges, and we talked about this earlier, has been the president's rhetoric around the United States' role in the world that has had a negative impact. And hopefully people will look at our continued involvement and not the rhetoric. But I think that's not going to change in the immediate future. And I also think this is a long-term competition. And people are responding to what they've heard in the last couple of years. But what we really want to look at is the long-term implications of China being involved versus the United States. I would cite Vietnam as an example. You know, we fought a war in Vietnam, but the Vietnamese didn't look at us as colonizers in the same way that they had seen from some of the previous countries that had been in Vietnam. And after that war was over, 30 years later, we went back and we made peace, and now we have a very robust, very positive relationship with Vietnam. I'm not sure that China has that same relationship with Vietnam. So I think we've got to look long-term at what this fight looks like, or this competition.
Look, I think this is really important because sometimes as we go through these discussions and we start analyzing where the opinions are and so forth, let's take a look at the reality of this. And in this room, you have a group of folks that have studied world activity. Is there anybody here that would suggest that the human rights are better for those individuals controlled or participating in China versus the United States? Are our long-term goals of reforms and of literally fair trade better with China or with the United States and the West? In the last 70 years, has there ever been an improvement in the history of man? Has there ever been a time in the history of man in which economic development has improved better than what it has in the last 70 years, where we have laid out the rule of law and the process that all of us are entitled to work and to make our countries better? And if you take a look at what the United States has participated in, has been one of trying to raise the tide for everybody, not just for the United States, but in doing so, we have benefited, and your countries have benefited. And yet, if you take a look right now in the way that we view China and the one belt, one road concept which they've laid out, it is designed to change that and to refocus on China. And if you take a look at where they're moving their control and where they're emphasizing it, it's in the busiest trade lanes, in the Indochina Pacific Theater, as we've discussed, where your communications lines are. And the whole idea is to refocus that there. And my question to you is, at what point do you think they would be in which the cost of doing business will be what they believe is appropriate for their protection? And where else, and when else in the history of the world has one nation, along with a lot of allies that have joined together, protected the trade routes for everybody?
Senator Rounds, there is just one interesting, there are lots of interesting points from what you said, but there's an interesting point which comes back to Lobsang's question about how America is perceived in the world, because it's surely a very strange situation. Politicians and countries tend to claim far more for themselves than is reality. And there's something, it appears, about the Make America Great Again philosophy, if I can call it that, which seems to want to kind of understate what America is doing in the world. Do you think that this is going to change? Do you think that President Trump is going to bring into alignment the rhetoric with what America is actually doing in the world?
You know, I do. And I think part of it, though, is for the president, it was a message back in that a lot of our traditional industries really were hurt as the expansion of trade went elsewhere. We don't have a steel industry anymore, basically. Our trade deals were made years ago, and they really haven't been updated. And so what the president came in, and look, he's not a politician, he's a businessman. He came in and he was driving hard. Do we all agree with the direction that he took in terms of taking on the rest of the world all at one time? No. But he felt it was necessary to do so at this point because, look, he comes from New York City where he saw what steel meant. He watched men and women in labor unions building structures, and he saw that industry go away. And so for him, this is a matter of taking care of folks that haven't had anybody taking care of them. And for him, it's personal.
So he started out as one way of characterizing it, he started out his first 2 years as a businessman president and the next 2 years as a politician president?
But we're going to find out. I think what he's going to do, I think he has learned very quickly in this job. Mm-hmm. And once again, I'm just going to ask you, take a look at the actual actions that he is doing. You may disagree with the actions, but in the United States, in terms of what we've done, we changed our tax laws. We've reduced thousands of regulations on our folks here. He made promises. He said he would have conservative judges appointed to the Supreme Court and to the other courts. He has honored those. And so from the American public's perspective, here's a man who came in not to simply get reelected. He came in making promises that he really believed would work. Our GDP is now closing in on 4%. And if people were telling us we couldn't do that. And so that's going to impact the rest of the world as well. So do we have some rearrangements going on right now with regard to trade? Yes. But the sooner we get in and get these things done and make our deals, the better, and the sooner we can get back to the business of business again. And that's what we want, and I think the Senate feels very strongly about that.
And let me just say, I don't want to get into a debate here, but there are two views about some of the issues that Senator Rounds laid out. And
you don't have bipartisan support about everything. We never said
we
that.
do not.
No.
The tax bill is one of those.
We've got a final question because we're running out of time. Paula Dobriansky at the back there, please.
Thank you very much, Paula Dobriansky, Harvard University. Putin clearly has as an objective to undermine, if not fragment, the NATO alliance, and also go up against the very institutions and values post-World War II. And when you look back at his remarks in Munich, in the Munich Security Conference in 2007, he really articulated this very directly. My question is, we have focused on the value of our military unity, modernization and mission, also economic sanctions. What about the issue of countering his narrative? He has invested heavily in disinformation. We used to have Soviet active measures when it was the Soviet Union. So what about the radios? What about those avenues that we should be pursuing individually and also collectively within the alliance to really uphold those values and to ensure that there isn't that complacency? If you'll comment on that.
We've got about a minute left, so if you could make this your final remarks, that would be great.
I think that's a real challenge, Paula, and I said this yesterday. I think it's one of the biggest challenges we face as a democracy, and we have not geared up our effort to make it clear what the truth is in an effective enough way to counter what Russia is doing, and we've got to do better.
It used to be propaganda that was put out in newspapers and on TV. Now it's not just newspapers and TV, it's on the internet, and it's going directly to people, and it's being built with pretend people who are making claims and accusations, and if it's on the internet, it must be true, right? And they have mastered that prospect.
Senator Rounds, Senator Shaheen, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you all.